Thank you everyone. I'm going to speak in English, of course I'm not in French. Many people in France and all over the world, they know about Louis Pasteur because he prepared something related to the rabies vaccination in 1885. Actually, very few people know his first background, what he did when he was young. And we were lucky because in 2022 we celebrated Louis Pasteur's bicentenary of birth. And at that time, I had to decide with the Academy of Sciences what we are going to do. My idea was to try to see how the youth, Mr. Pasteur's youth, how can a little kid coming from Jura is a little province in 300 kilometers southeast from France, so just imagine in 1822, no train and no dinosaurs. That's a key point, no dinosaurs at that time. Pasteur spent his life, his youth here. And how can this guy become a man of the world? Everybody thinks it's about rabies. Actually, no. We have to go a little bit backwards, and maybe this look backwards can be used for the future. Louis Pasteur is born in a little city, Dole, so it's now 30,000 people. And after a few years, he went with his parents to Arbois, which is still his houses. And together, we put these two houses together to be a bigger museum we call EPCC, Public Establishment, Cultural Cooperation, Cultural Partnership, about Mr. Pasteur's heritage. But his father, this is what is interesting. He himself, this is a quote from him, he himself said, the smell of the tannery. His father was a tanner. This is me. He was preparing leather. And a few years later, another quote, quite later, after he became a chemist, he was a very sensory scientist. He was working on different type of crystals. Well, that's chemical things. Maybe he's better than me, but the chemical of organic products is quite different because of their crystal, the crystal they made compared to the light. So this is polarized light. This is too difficult for me, and maybe too difficult for everyone anyway. He was working on crystals. The same molecule has two types of crystals. And the difference was the little facets this way. And these two molecules, these two crystals, have not the same taste. He was able to feel the different taste of these crystals, and that nobody before him did it. And he says himself, I hope things will change. Now that attention has been drawn to these singularities, I hope things will change. So we were in 1886. This is quite long. And to change that, we have to go back with 3 acts. So first, when Pasteur was with his father in the tannery, so you know what is leather making, and we have some traces in the archives that it was a very, very stinky atmosphere. In one paper, I quote something I found in his archives, we know that he received he was supplied with fish oil mixed with tallow and grease for each side of the leather, the flour side and the flesh side, the two sides of the leather. So that means that was really stinky. But at the real beginning of his life, the workers working in the tannery was using the rest of the cork. They use bark coming from oak, and they prepare what they call cloths, kind of cloths. And these cloths were used afterwards to burn, to have some heat, because the wood was too expensive for people living in Paris. So the workers were making some money thanks to these cloths. They called that cheese because of the shape. So that was funny. So Louis Pasteur was used to this preparation. And we found in another book of his nephew, Adrien Loire, Adrien was going somewhere in Arbois' house. I was a child when one day in Arbois, he means Louis Pasteur, asked me what I was doing. I went to the tannery where I had fun making cloths with the workers and the Vichot children. And Pasteur answers, I too once made cloths. So he was used to the smell, and he was used to the touch of the rest of the cork. So two images of the tannery, which we renewed the last 10 years to have, of course, some more people. And it's so important in Dole that there is a restaurant named Bark Mill, referring to the mills to prepare the cork. So this is the first part of Pasteur's life. The second aspect is Pasteur was drawing and painting. He was working on polarized, the relationship with crystals and polarized light. So he understood that life was asymmetric. Whatever the organic acid come from, could be for asparagus, aspartic, apple, malic acid, or succinic acid, the crystals are asymmetric. This asymmetry he mentioned about his states. And we were questioning ourselves, how could this guy see that, although nobody at that time could see the difference of the two crystals. The crystals are very tiny. And many people were working on these crystals, but nobody saw the difference. Finally, an American from Princeton, I remember, I think, found the explanation to me. When he was young, when he was 13 years old, actually Louis Pasteur didn't pretend to be a scientist, but he was a painter, and he learned lithography. Lithography is a very interesting technique because you see things in a mirror, exactly the two crystals. So his teacher was Etienne Charles Pointurier, and his teacher bought a lithographic limestone close to Arbois. So everything is happening in Arbois when Pasteur was very young. There he was 13 years old when he was learning lithography. And when you do lithography, you see the things like in a mirror. And Louis Pasteur himself explains that. He was doing the portrait of Charles Chapuis, one of his friends, and he writes to his father in 1841. There he was 19 years old. He was living in high school in Besançon to Paris. So he made a painting and a lithography for all his friends. And Chapuis was one of his best friends. The only thing I was afraid of is that the portrait won't look as good on paper as it is done on stone, because on the stone and on the paper, it's exactly the contrary, like in a mirror. So I also took care to look at him very often in the mirror while I was doing it. That means he was looking in the mirror and then doing the things in the lithography, exactly like the crystals. So that means when he was looking in the microscope or in the binocular, he was used to see in a mirror. And the other scientists of that time didn't do that because they were not doing lithography. And Pasteur was doing lithography when he was quite young. Not only lithography, but painting. So when he was 13, 14 years old, he used to have one painting, interesting one, because his teacher explains that he has a nice way to say the look, Napoleon's look, because the Battle of Eylau was a tragedy. A lot of people died. Very quickly, he was interested in the new techniques to reproduce the reality, specifically the daguerreotype. Daguerreotype is from 1840s, so very early in Louis Pasteur's job. 1822, he was 18 when he got interested in the daguerreotype. And that means he was a painter, and then he shifted step by step to another way to reproduce the reality through daguerreotype. And then finally, he became a real visual artist. And you can find these traces in one of very interesting book, his book dedicated to silkworm diseases. Because the first illustration of this book is the countryside in the south of France. The second one is the drawings. And step by step, at the end of the book, he showed the yeast or the bacteria shown by the microscope. So there's a strategy of presenting the job. And what was funny, and that would be a question for later, I think, for the discussion, he wanted to explain to people that you can use a microscope to understand these microbes. And he was fighting against the adults. And he says, well, it's very easy. I got an 8-year-old student, a kid, used to it to the microscope. And he had the administration to buy a lot of microscopes for the kids to help the farmers to understand the silkworm diseases. So he named that, and he named these microscopes administrative microscopes. because it was his only way to get sponsorship. At that time, there's no the institution you mentioned. Act 3, related to what you said about pasteurizations, 1865, that means 20 years before rabies, once again. He had the first patent dedicated to his technique of pasteurization, and he launched a patent April 11th, 1865. This patent is a very interesting communicating object because he went to the US, of course, because of the situation, present situation in the US, just happy to say that maybe Pasteur could have been the president of the US in 1872 because all the California winemakers were very happy to use Mr. Pasteur's technique to pasteurize their wine and to improve their wine. And you can see that I put him to a big job. So, but unfortunately, he didn't want to go to the US. Actually, he didn't want to go farther from France. So he stayed always in France. So this patent, we have some traces, interesting traces in the archives where he mentioned in the manuscripts we have just a few quotations. Very beautiful yeast, spherical and or oval, with granulation, but not very visible, firm contours, translucency. He was using touch, his touch, when the leaven sticks to the fingers like he was doing the clods some years ago. The sense of smells, he's facing the butyric fermentation, and he could understand the evolution of the fermentation related to the smell. And the taste, if you chew black grapes successively with pulsar grapes, the difference in strength is enormous. So there are many traces of this. And one of the interesting questions is about the wine heating dispute, because after he used these pasteurizators, the process the device to prepare this pasteurized wine, a lot of people were against him because of heating the wine. He could change the taste. So he made a lot of committees to prove that the taste was not altered by the heating. And the people from Burgundy didn't want to use the heating because the Burgundy wine was supposed to be the great wine. And the first to use the heating of the wine were people from the south, where we have not bad wine, but more common wine in a way at that time. And it's improving nowadays at that time. So I thank you very much, Mr. Pasteur, for all that. It's interesting to see that maybe our scientists nowadays don't have these 5 senses. They are not multi-sensory scientists, probably. That could be a question, and maybe to the IA has some difficulties to do something with the 5 senses. So thank you very much, Mr. Pasteur, and thank you for having me today with you together.